All right, welcome back to the channel. You can see I got the Miata all torn apart. I replaced the crank seal on the front here. That's where my main oil leak was coming from, I think. So I got that fixed, and then I'm doing some wiring and all sorts of other stuff. But I had to take the timing belt off, of course. And then I didn't realize it at first, but the crank damper on here is this BHJ crank damper. They don't sell these anymore, probably for a reason, but you can see it's got the timing gear built into it, which I didn't realize. So I had to get a new crank gear on order because I'm going with the ATI fluid damper, just because I think it'll be a little bit better for a street car. And it's got the 2 belt slots for my air conditioner, so I can get my AC back working. So I'm doing that, waiting on the crank gear, and I'm trying to figure out any other oil leaks I might have had. So I noticed the O-ring here for my turbo drain for my turbo is leaking, this pipe here. So the O-ring was kind of crumbling and smashed, so I'm going to replace that. Hopefully that'll solve that oil leak. And then at the bottom where it connects to the oil pan, I think it was leaking as well. So hopefully that'll solve it. I really hate oil leaks. I just want to get this thing on the road and where I can drive it, park at my driveway and things, and not have oil drips. I think maybe my oil pressure sender might be leaking too, so I'm gonna tighten that up, maybe pull it off and put some new Teflon tape on there. But otherwise, just kind of going through the car. This engine was built by Jesse Prather Motorsports, at least that's what I was told. It seems like they did a really good job on the build. For whatever reason, this crank seal was totally loose. When I pulled the timing gear off, this seal, I could pull it out with my hands. I didn't have to use any tool or anything. It just came right out. So it wasn't seated fully. The new one I put on there with some anaerobic sealant, some sealant that doesn't require oxygen to cure. And that's been recommended. So I used that on the outside of the seal and lubed the inside with the engine oil. So hopefully that'll solve it. Then you can see I've got the fuse box all pulled apart here because I'm underneath upgrading some of the wiring that I talked about before. So let's get the car up and I'll show you that. Under the car, I've got this new #2 wire, which I'm running back to the battery, and just cleaning up the rest of the wiring, sorting through it. And I did a big 0 gauge cable from the starter to the alternator here, and then put some new lugs on these power wires which go up to the fuse box. So that wiring is all really, I mean, it's as big of a gauge as should make any difference. So hopefully my voltage drop between the alternator and the battery is less, or even down to like no voltage drop, which would be ideal. And then hopefully with this new lug on these wires, I will not have low voltage at idle like I was having before, because that was my #1 problem with idle, is that as soon as it drops down below like 1,000 or 900 RPM, the voltage started dropping from 13.5 volts all the way down under 13 volts, 12.5 volts, something like that, which was just causing a cascading effect. Weak timing control, weak sparks probably, and not able to cope. So hopefully with this, that'll solve that problem, and I'll have good voltage at idle, and then hopefully I can make the car idle like it should. So that's what I'm working on. I got most of the oil leaks cleaned up. This used to be just all wet with oil. I think the crank seal was leaking, and that was wicking or getting spun up onto the alternator, which was then throwing it all the way back. So got most of that cleaned up. You can see there's my oil pressure sender. That's from a 94 Miata. This is a 96. The 96 just has the basically oil pressure dummy light, which shows you if it has pressure or not, but it doesn't actually show you the pressure. So by using the 94 oil pressure sender, and then also the gauge in the cluster, I changed to a 94, and that actually shows me a variable scale of oil pressure. This pump this is BLS stage 2 on there, V3. I don't know what oil pump this is. Does anybody have any idea? I don't think it's a Boundary Engineering, or maybe it is, but it's just a BLS. I've never heard of that oil pump. But anyway, it's like a race spec pump. I think probably makes like 70 pounds of oil pressure or something. So I need to get all these oil fittings and seals and everything really tight. Otherwise it's gonna just start leaking again. So that about does it. Really stoked to finally get this wiring done. I had some screw ups on the starter solenoid. I broke one of those studs off, so I had to swap a replacement solenoid on there from an old starter. Looks like it got all back together, so I'm gonna keep moving ahead. And then I'm hoping I don't have to, but I did buy a rear main seal for the Miata, just in case the rear main is also leaking. I didn't see much oil in that area, so fingers crossed that seal's all good and I don't need to replace that. But if I do, I got it. And I also picked up a new boost control solenoid because I've basically figured out my boost control solenoid must have gone bad when it was sitting in my backyard for a couple years. Maybe got some corrosion in there or something. So I just got some goodies here from Flying Miata and put those on after I get everything else buttoned up. And then lastly, the car was not overheating, but it was running hot and it was having trouble cooling down. Basically, I found a bunch of rusty, nasty water in my radiator. I flushed that, back flushed it back and forth a bunch of times. So I'm thinking that probably there was just corrosion built up in there when it was sitting again in my backyard, and maybe this engine that I bought had a little bit of corrosion because it was sitting in a garage for months to a year. So I'm thinking the radiator is probably pretty clean now. I might get some like radiator flush chemical treatment so that I can really get in there and get anything else that might be stuck. And then I'm gonna flush the engine side too. And fingers crossed again, I'm hoping that will solve my heating problem. Because the previous engine, it always was cool. Even when I was doing long pulls, fourth, fifth, sixth gear, it would still be about 210 to 220. Whereas this one, even on small short pulls, it was getting up to 222, 224, which is right on the edge of where I'm worried. I don't want to take this thing over 230 degrees. It probably could go a little bit higher than that for short periods, but just want to keep that temperature in check. So got the wiring finalized with the big 2-gauge wire here. I'm gonna put that on there. Did a new ground, so everything is good under the car and back here. Also, I think I'm getting old because I just lifted my Miata. I raised it about a half an inch, trying to get it to ride a little bit better. I took my wife out for a drive the other night, a couple weeks back, and the car is just so bouncy. When I was younger, I loved it, but I must be getting old, so I lifted it. Hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother out on the road. Miata's back. All right. So as you can see, the Miata's back on the road, working awesome. I think I solved most of the oil leaks. I think the rear main seal might be leaking, so I'll probably have to drop the transmission to replace that. But otherwise, oil leaks solved on the front of the engine. The cooling system is working way better. I got the radiator and the engine flushed and refilled with new coolant, and now it's staying much cooler for a lot longer. And when the fans kick on, the temperature just immediately drops. So that's all perfect, exactly how it should be. And then also, I think that the engine had the timing belt off a tooth. When I pulled it apart, things didn't quite look right, and I noticed some other paint marks on the timing gears on the cams, and it was lined up in a different spot than factory. And I'm thinking maybe they did that at the race shop for maybe better high RPM performance or something like that, because this engine was in a track car. It was just a track Miata, full cage, everything. So maybe that's what they did to get better high RPM performance. But now that I've got it retimed to the factory timing marks, it idles way better, and the low end is way better. It used to just like struggle off the line, and I was like, this isn't right. With my previous engine, it was like really fast. The turbo would spool up quick, but this one, it wouldn't spool up until 3,000 or 4,000 RPM. But now, after I fix that timing, the turbo starts spooling like right off idle, like it should be, and it just puts you in their seat and you just rev. So that's awesome. I got that solved. I got that ATI fluid damper installed, and I haven't hooked up the AC yet. I wanted to get it running first, but I'm gonna probably get AC going here soon. Otherwise, I'm super stoked on the Miata. It's back, and hopefully Well, we'll see about that oil leak. It was a little bit wet under the rear of the oil pan where it meets the transmission, and I'm fingers crossed that maybe that's just some residual oil or something, but we'll figure that out. If I need to drop the trans and do that seal, at this point it's worth it, if everything else is still good. So really stoked to have the Miata back on the road. You can see we have 219,000 miles on this baby, and of course 200 mile high mileage hero. Got that sticker from Auto Alex. Just so stoked to have the Miata back on the road. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time here on Turbo Active. We're under the car again. You can see the front is totally dry. This is where it was leaking the most, and also my return line from the turbo was leaking, so I got that all cleaned up and new Teflon tape on there, tightened up, and it's all good to go. And then also up, it's behind the oil filter, but up there, oil pressure sender, which also I think was leaking a little bit. So this, the front of the engine's all dry, but you can see a little bit of oil like coming here from in between the transmission and the motor, and that could still just be like residual oil from how much it was leaking before. That's just making its way out now as I'm heating it up and driving it. But I'm going to keep an eye on that and see if that starts leaking more, and then I'm going to have to do the rear main seal. But otherwise, she's good to go. You can see I've got the new main power wire back to the battery, and as I showed before, the alternator wiring's all done, and I measured at idle. The voltage at the alternator is 14.4, and I measured at the battery and it was 14.3. So that's awesome. The voltage used to be, like I said, almost 13 volts or lower than 13 volts at the battery when the alternator was at 14.4. So I think replacing that wire solved the problem on there. I noticed the car is idling much stronger now. That was like a big problem I was having, is it wouldn't idle no matter what I did, but it seems like it's idling now. So that was probably with the timing belt was off a tooth. That was probably making the idle really weak. So hopefully, you know, I'm tackling these problems one by one, and so far so good. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.